They called her Sister Evelyn. At the small chapel on the edge of a Kansas town, she was the one who swept the aisles every morning, read the scriptures every night, and prayed for the nameless souls no one else remembered. She'd done it for 20 years, day by day, with a simple belief that kindness, if practiced long enough, could change people. But then one day, she saw it with her own eyes, a group of soldiers dragging a native boy into the church courtyard, tying his hands, and beating him until his face no longer resembled anything human, just dirt and blood. The reason he'd stolen a loaf of bread from the army's storeroom. Father Grayson stood beside her that day and said only one cold sentence: "There must be discipline." That night, for the first time in 2 decades, Evelyn knelt before the altar and couldn't utter a word. Faith doesn't vanish in a single night. It cracks like drought-hardened soil until it can no longer hold your steps. When someone asked if she'd be willing to go to Colorado, where they were building a silver mining camp, to help bring moral guidance to the natives, she nodded. Not to save anyone, but to leave, to avoid facing herself. The mountain road was jagged and dusty, lined with suspicious stairs. The mining camp was nothing like the church. It was a mash of iron blood and profanity. And there, she saw a child, a young Navajo boy chained to a post, eyes red from crying, but still trying not to. Beside him was an iron cage holding a long-haired native man, bruised and in torn clothes. He didn't look at anyone, only at the mountains. "Raoul," one soldier said, "the Red Ridge Killer." Evelyn didn't ask, didn't judge. She simply left a small bottle of water and some stale bread in front of the cage. As she turned away, she heard the faintest clink of chains, like a thank you that didn't know how to speak. That night, she didn't sleep. She just sat by the fire in the center of camp, staring at the flames, remembering the days she used to believe that light alone could drive out darkness. Now she understood some places light couldn't reach, unless you walked in carrying it yourself. On her second day at the Silver Camp, Evelyn understood one thing clearly. This place didn't need sermons. A whip and a gun were all it took to keep order. They called the Navajo boy the runt, or that little animal. No one used his name. He was maybe 9 or 10 small for his age, back hunched from the iron chain wrapped around his chest. The soldiers fed him scraps on a good day. On other days, nothing. Evelyn slipped him a piece of bread when no one was looking. He stared at her like he was dreaming. "Raoul." The man in the cage said nothing. Each day he sat in silence, staring into the distance. Sometimes Evelyn saw him close his eyes as if listening to the wind. Once she left him a bit of water. He nodded. No thanks, no begging. But that single nod told Evelyn he was still human. She carried with her a small silver crucifix hanging above her wooden cot. That evening, when she went to adjust it, her hand trembled. It took her a moment to realize why, because for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was carrying her faith or just wearing a decoration. That night, there were screams. Evelyn rushed out to find the boy being dragged across the yard, face smeared with blood. A soldier shouted that he had hidden stones in his shoes to throw at the guards. Evelyn screamed, "That's enough." But no one listened. They beat him like a stray dog. She threw herself in the way, taking a punch to the shoulder that dropped her to the dirt. The boy trembled in her arms, his teeth chattering like glass. That night, Evelyn sat beside his bed. She'd cleaned and bandaged his wounds with strips of cloth. The boy looked at her like he wanted to ask something, but he didn't speak. He just held her hand tightly. Before sleep, she placed the crucifix on the table, stared at it for a long time, then quietly tucked it into her pocket. Tomorrow, she thought, I may no longer be Sister Evelyn. Maybe just an old woman, no cross, no church, but someone who knows that a beaten child is not an animal, and sometimes the truest prayer is to protect them. At dawn, Evelyn brought a bit of water to Raoul's cage. She didn't say anything, just set it down like always. But today, he didn't stay seated. He stood up, tall, broad-shouldered, lean, but solid. His face was swollen, a crack of dried blood at the corner of his mouth. He looked straight at her. His dark eyes held no blame, no gratitude, only silence. The kind that made Evelyn feel more exposed than if she'd stood there naked without her habit. "Aren't you afraid?" she asked suddenly, her voice so small she barely heard it herself. Raoul didn't answer. He just pointed to the sky. Birds soared in flocks, their cries faint like whispers. Evelyn didn't know what he meant, but in that moment she realized he was freer than the men holding the guns. Ashki was assigned to sweep the stables. Each time he passed her room, he'd leave a small twig or leaf at the door, like a secret thank you. Evelyn kept every one of them lined up on the windowsill. 8 branches. She had stopped counting days by numbers. Now she counted by leaves. That evening, she brought Raoul a piece of cornbread and some tobacco she had quietly taken from the kitchen. She slid them through the bars. He looked at them but didn't move. After a few minutes, he sat down and spoke his first words in English. "Why help?" That question cut through Evelyn like a blade. "I don't know," she said quietly. "Maybe because I didn't help enough when I still had the chance." Raoul said nothing, then slowly took the bread and ate it, as if chewing through years of captivity between clenched jaws. Evelyn sat down on the dirt outside the cage, leaning her back against the wooden wall. She didn't need to say anything else. Neither did he, but they had begun to understand each other. That night in her small room, Evelyn placed the crucifix back on the table, but this time she didn't hang it. She just sat and looked at it. Her eyes were dry. No tears. Only one truth, clear as fire. If she had to break God's law to save a child and a man, then maybe God would understand. The 10th morning at the Silver Camp began with a soldier's scream. Evelyn opened her door and saw Ashki being dragged from the stables into the yard. His hair was a tangled mess face, streaked with dirt and grit. A commanding officer yelled, "He stole a saddle," though it was clearly a lie, meant to send a message. Raoul slammed his hands against the bars, and for the first time roared a guttural sound in a language Evelyn didn't understand. But she understood the pain in it, like a wounded animal, like fire doused before it could burn. She shoved her way through. The soldier stepped in front of Ashki, arms spread wide. Her voice cut through the air. "Have you done enough yet?" The commander sneered. "You want to get locked up too, sister?" Evelyn didn't answer. She bent down, pulled Ashki up with trembling hands. His eyes were wet, but he didn't cry. Evelyn looked up. She saw Raoul watching them, no longer shouting, no longer rattling the cage, just watching. His gaze like mountain rock, hard, but not cold. That night, Evelyn walked the length of the camp. No sleep, no prayers. She remembered all the years she had believed in scripture and righteousness, but now she believed something else. Anyone who refuses to protect the weak when they can does not deserve to be called human. The next morning, she approached the young soldier who often watched her from a distance. His name was Luke, a new recruit, still not fully corrupted, but already getting used to it. "You don't believe what they're doing is right, do you?" she asked. Luke hesitated. "I'm just following orders." "That's the most dangerous thing," Evelyn replied, following without asking. Silence hung between them. Then Luke slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring of keys. "You know what you're doing," he whispered. Evelyn didn't answer. She just took the keys. Her hand trembled, but her eyes didn't. That night, when the camp was drunk on liquor, Evelyn approached Raoul's cage. Keys in hand, her eyes met his. "This isn't mercy," she whispered. "This is a choice." Raoul nodded. He didn't say thank you, and Evelyn didn't need him to. When the door swung open, Raoul stepped out tall and quiet as mountain wind. Ashki was already waiting in the shadows. Evelyn nodded to them both. They had no plan, only the certainty that silence had lasted long enough. They ran. Through canyons, through thorn brush and roots snaking across the trail, Evelyn ran with 2 souls she'd once been taught to call savages. Ashki darted ahead, light as a forest squirrel. Raoul stayed behind her, his hand gripping her shoulder whenever she stumbled. Blood trickled from her shin skin, split by rock, but she didn't stop. Near dawn, they reached a wind-sheltered ravine where a small pool glistened beside moss-covered stone. Raoul built a fire from dry branches. Ashki quietly wrapped her in his coat. No one spoke. But Evelyn, for the first time, felt seen not as a nun, not as a redeemer, but as a wounded woman, simply trying to survive. Raoul took off his own coat and handed it to her. Evelyn tried to refuse, but he just looked at her and shook his head gently. She accepted it, put it on. It was heavy and warm, like a quiet reminder. She belonged to this journey now. There was no going back. When full daylight came, Evelyn noticed her hands trembling. But not from fear, from truth finally surfacing. She had once believed that faith had an answer for everything. But now the only thing keeping her upright was Raoul's gaze, steady, deep, and without judgment, and the small hand of Ashki clutching the edge of her coat as he slept. On the 3rd day of fleeing, Evelyn came down with a fever. Raoul found a type of leaf and brewed it into something bitter but warm. When he placed a hand on her forehead, his skin was calloused from sun and wind, but warm and steady. Evelyn could barely speak. She whispered, "Why didn't you leave me?" Raoul's voice was rough, almost broken. "People have left me enough." The words were simple, but they hit Evelyn's chest like a final confession. She remembered the years she stood at the pulpit, preaching love and forgiveness, all while turning her face from pain when it came too close. Now she didn't need a Bible to understand compassion. She only needed to see the way Raoul brewed water, the way Ashki gathered firewood, and the way they refused to leave her, even though no one had told them they had to stay. That night, Evelyn lay beside the fire. She reached into her pocket and touched the silver cross, then gently pulled it out and hung it on a branch above her head. Not to pray, but to remind herself she had carried it not to keep her old faith alive, but to begin learning a new one, a faith in people. On the fifth afternoon, as sunlight faded behind the cliffs, Evelyn saw a familiar figure standing at the base of the slope, Father Grayson. His hair now silver posture, straight as a crucifix, and voice deep enough to echo through the mountain air. He didn't come alone. 3 soldiers flanked him, faces like stone hands resting on their guns. "Evelyn," he called, as if she were still part of that little church. "Come back, before it's too late." Raoul pulled Ashki behind a narrow gap in the rocks. Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't hide. She didn't kneel. "Too late," for who she asked, her voice soft but clear. "For your soul," Grayson answered. "You've chosen the wrong side. These people, they don't know gratitude. They bite the hands that help them." Evelyn looked at him, and she no longer saw the priest, who once placed his hand on her head in blessing, but a man terrified of losing control. "No one chooses a side," she said. "We only choose people." One of the soldiers raised his rifle. Grayson lowered his hand to stop him. "I don't want to hurt you, Evelyn. You're just lost. Come back to God." Evelyn gave a quiet laugh, not mocking, more like someone who had just uncovered a truth that had always been there. "Father," she said, eyes never leaving Raoul and Ashki behind her, "I'm not lost. I just left the wrong path." Silence stretched like shadow over stone. Finally, Grayson turned. He said nothing more. He and the soldiers walked away. No arrests, no threats, just a single parting phrase. "You'll see." When they vanished from view, Evelyn sank to the ground, breathing out a long buried breath, like someone who hadn't let herself breathe in years. Raoul came near, said nothing, only offered her a piece of wild fruit. Evelyn took it, bit into it. The juice dripped down her chin, and she laughed softly suddenly, like someone who had just picked up a piece of her soul she didn't know she'd lost. That night, as cold wind swept through the canyon, Evelyn wrapped herself in Raoul's coat. Ashki curled against her side. No one read scripture. No one mentioned God. But between the fire, the earth, and the quiet weight of 2 lives resting near hers, Evelyn felt peace. For the first time in a very long time, she no longer needed forgiveness. The sun hadn't fully risen when the soldiers came. Hooves thundered through the canyon, voices shouting Raoul's name. Evelyn jolted awake, hand reaching for Ashki. Raoul was already up, tense, alert, his face drawn tight like a bowstring, but not surprised. "Go," he said, voice low. "We take the West Rockfall Trail." Evelyn nodded, but her feet didn't move. She looked down at her hands, dirt-stained, blood-streaked, trembling. Ashki grabbed her hand. "Mom," he whispered. Just one word, but it made Evelyn stand tall. They ran through brush, under low branches, clawing at their skin, tripping over hidden roots. Raoul led, silent, unwavering. Evelyn gasped for breath, but never stopped. When they reached the thicket, a gunshot cracked the air. A bullet sliced across Raoul's upper arm. He staggered, but didn't fall. Evelyn screamed, yanking him behind a slab of stone. Blood ran red across his skin. "You can't die here," she hissed, hands pressing hard against the wound, eyes blazing. Raoul looked at her, breath ragged. "I don't plan to." Ashki huddled beside them, shivering. Evelyn pulled him into her arms. As dusk fell, a group of soldiers drew near, guns ready. At the front was someone unexpected, Father Grayson. He raised a hand to signal the troops. "You still have time to come back," he called out. "You're not a sinner, Evelyn. You were just deceived." Evelyn rose to her feet. Her eyes were red, but not from tears. She held the old silver crucifix tightly in her hand. "You're wrong, Father," she said, voice cutting like wind through rock. "I've never seen more clearly." Grayson gestured for the soldiers to advance. Evelyn stepped in front of Raoul, and Ashki, arms outstretched. A gunshot rang out, but not from the soldiers. It came from the woods. A familiar figure stepped forward. Luke, the young soldier who had once handed her the keys. He stood there, rifle in hand, voice shaking. "They're not criminals." The soldiers froze. Grayson turned to him, face twisted in disbelief, then disgust. But another soldier slowly lowered his weapon, then another. No one spoke. Only wind moved, and Evelyn's eyes burned like coals in the fading light. No one was taken that night. Raoul's arm was bandaged. Evelyn sat beside him, gripping his hand. Ashki slept peacefully across her lap, lips still sticky with a piece of fruit. In the firelight, Evelyn saw something she'd begged for over 20 years. Justice. Not written in scripture, but held between one person and another. Spring came slowly to the high plains. Grass grew in scattered patches over red dirt, and clusters of purple wildflowers rose from the soil like quiet greetings. Evelyn sat by the creek, planting each stem gently into the cold earth, not to remember anyone, but to mark herself. This day, a year ago, she whispered, I was still standing in a church, saying words my heart no longer believed. Raoul stood not far off, sharpening a hunting knife. Sunlight warmed his back, making him look like part of the mountains, steady, unshaken, yet radiating a quiet warmth. Ashki jumped from stone to stone, chasing butterflies, laughing. Around his neck was a handmade necklace, leather cord, and beads. Evelyn smiled softly. He doesn't call me Mom anymore, she thought, but he doesn't have to. In the small stone shelter they had built together by hand, with sweat and patience, there was no Bible, no cross on the wall. But each night they sat by the fire and told stories. Raoul spoke with his hands, his eyes, the rhythm of the crackling flames. Evelyn answered with memories, honest ones, unafraid of judgment. One day, a small group of native travelers stopped by. They brought salt seeds and an older woman. Raoul said simply, "My aunt. She used to be a healer." The woman looked at Evelyn as if she had known her all her life. When Evelyn bowed her head in greeting, the woman placed her hand on Evelyn's forehead and said in English, "No one gave you. You were found." That night, Evelyn sat by the firearms wrapped around herself, not from cold, but because for the first time she felt whole. They never spoke of marriage, no vows, no papers. But each morning when Raoul brushed her cheek with his fingers, and each night when Ashki curled into her side, she knew. She had been chosen, not for being holy, not for being good, but simply because she could still love and be loved, even after life had tried to burn that out of her. Words spread about them like smoke on the wind. Some called her mad, others a traitor, but still some came to stay a few nights, to ask for advice, or just to hear a story. Once a young priest passed through. He saw the silver cross hanging on the doorframe and asked, "You still believe?" Evelyn answered, not like before. "Now I believe that kindness is a kind of faith." When her father, the man who once taught her to be obedient to earn love, died alone in a hospital, Evelyn didn't feel joy, only a quiet urge to plant more flowers by the creek. Not for him, but for the little girl named Evelyn, the one no one ever held on to, but no one could take away either. Raoul came up behind her, placed a worn blanket over her shoulders, and when he gently said, "No one gets to send you away anymore," Evelyn closed her eyes and smiled. Not because everything was peaceful, but because what remained was enough to live on. Evelyn once believed worth came from obedience from the cross, from the praise of those in power, but she came to realize compassion isn't found in scripture, it's found in small acts, shielding a beaten child, offering water to a man in chains, or simply not turning away from someone just because others call them savage. Raoul, once labeled an enemy, never had to speak to teach her this: love is a choice, not a reward. And Ashki, the nameless child, showed her gentleness is the last thing to survive, even in violence. This isn't a story about a nun who lost her faith. It's about a human being who found it again, not in stained glass or sermons, but in a glance, in an action, in love that asked for nothing in return. In a world that often hands power to the cruel, Evelyn chose what was right, even when it meant standing alone. And sometimes what's right is simply not looking away when someone else is hurting. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos.